Welcome to WinDevCon 2007 Web Development Philosophy course. For those of you who don't know about it, I have to tell you that this course is based on an article that I published on my blog a few months ago. So if you find a few things that are familiar, it's because you already read it. But there are a little more in this course than there was in the original article. So, the targets of that course is specifically classical developers wanting to start web development, and also those already there and still a little lost. If you are a web development specialist, probably all the things that I'm going to tell you are already known to you. Perhaps the angle at which I'm going to say them, which is the WebDev angle, is going to be a little new, but except for that, everything else should be quite classical. When you are coming from WinDev and you are starting to develop in WebDev, basically it should be painless. And most of the time it is painless. There is one big problem after WebDev is doing everything it can to make everything easier for the WinDev developer. There is one big problem remaining, and it's the development philosophy. Yes, I know some people say that development philosophy is quite a big word, but it's mainly about a way of looking at things. When you are talking about classical software development, the code and the UI are merged. Basically, you can access everything from everywhere. From inside a class, you can access the object in a window. From inside a window, you can access the code, you can access the data. Everything is always there at your hand. When you start to use WebDev, the first thing that you do generally is to look at the code editor, and you start to wonder because, well, there is the browser code on one side, there is the server code on the other, then there are some functions that are available only in browser code, some functions available only in server code. Then you have the code execution order that is different. When is this thing being executed? Before, after, is the browser code executed before the server code, after, in which case, and so on. Then of course you can add to that the complexity of JavaScript or PHP coding on the browser side, and browser side only. So clearly, when you just look at the WebDev code editor, you have to realize that it is not the same thing than your classical software development, and more precisely your classical WinDev development. And if it's not the same thing, then you should think differently. WebDev minimized the web development difficulties for you. That's the main purpose of using WebDev instead of using, of course, classical HTML coding, PHP coding, and so on. WebDev does lots of things for you, and it minimizes the difficulty. And for that, WebDev hides that you are developing a website. It tries to give you the impression that you are still in your WinDev environment and you are just doing the same thing. But there is a big difference. A website is not a piece of software. It's not. A website is more something like a collection of software talking together. Try to imagine that. You have one big software. It's the server-side application. It's just running on the server. And then you have a lot of small software, very, very small. In fact, it's each HTML page. And each of those is executed independently on the client machine in JavaScript. So it's not only a collection of software, but it's a collection of software that are not run on the same machine. One part, a big part, is on the server, and all the small ones are on another machine far, far away. So if you are able to see things that way, everything is going to be easier. All the browser code of a page is one small program. You see your HTML page, you have browser code, server code, browser code, server code, browser code, server code. Well, take all the browser code together and think of that as one small program that is executed on the client side. Each part of the code is going to be executed at different times, but you are used to that. It's the same system in WebDev. You have the code of the button, you have the code of the initialization, when click, and so on. So all that is the same thing that what you have in a window. Now, the server code of a page, all these parts that are server code, are together a part of the big server-side program. If you compare that to a traditional software, if you wanted to do the same thing, to code the same way than you have to code in WebDev in a traditional WinDev program, here is something like what you would have to do. You would have to create a software where each of the windows of your program is compiled in a separate executable and does not access data. Just display data, enter data, that's all. Then all the file access code, everything that do hread, seek, hread first, SQL query, whatever, and the code that is processing that data and preparing information for the next display and all this kind of thing would be in a big separate executable. Then you would have to add communications between all these programs. In fact, in each of these, this small window would communicate with the big one. The big one would do what is requested, then open another program or the same one with new data in it. And you would need to have this communication layer. Well, if you're able to code something like that, you're able to create a website, a complex website. That's the same thing. And by the way, this is exactly how you would code a website before a tool like WebDev existed. A good example of that is the way you could create a website using WebDev, and I'm saying really WebDev here. Well, you still can do it using that technique without any specific web tool. Let's have a look. On one side, you would create HTML pages. You always need them. There's no question about that. So either by hand in a text editor, after all they are just text files, or using something like Dreamweaver or whatever HTML editor you like to use. And after that, on the server, you would create one or several WebDev executable. So how would that work? Well, in the HTML page, you would have links, buttons, things like that would start an interaction with the server. Well, in fact, that would be a link, a URL, to the corresponding WebDev executable on the server. So the executable would start, then read the field content sent by the submit in the HTML code, and of course based on that it would do what was expected of him, read files, extract data, and so on. Then it would prepare the answer page, which of course is also an HTML page. For that it could use a template and include the data in a predetermined spot in that template. And once the page is ready, it would send it back using an API call, extremely simple, one line of code, the same way it would use an API call to get the field in the first place. And that's it. You have a website developed using WebDev and not WebDev. That's the very basic thing. It's also the same thing that would be done using PHP, using any kind of language like that. You will have separate files that would be called depending of the link, and independently. If you look at the PHP application, it's a collection of small files done to manage this, to manage that, to manage this, to manage that. It's not one big thing. Well, at that point, the corresponding HTML page would be displayed on the client, and that's it. The current windasso.org website, at the time I'm recording that it's still true, is done that way. I know, I created the site in the first place, so I know exactly how it's done. At the time, well, WebDev did not exist. Even when the first ancestor of WebDev called WDWeb was available, it was not in any state of being used professionally. It was really a product that needed to evolve a lot at the time, and well, we continued to do the website of Windasso in that manner. So it's perfectly doable. And as you can see, it's exactly the way I described it. You have this small HTML file on one side and one or several executable on the server calling that. So the way of thinking of things is totally different. So of course, at that level, as you can understand, you are talking about different executable. There is no context, no help. You manage everything. There is nothing linking things together. All the facilities that you're used to in WinDev, of course, in that case, do not exist. So we're going to talk about a few examples about showing you how different the things are in the web development. And a first example is going to be with the simple info instruction. It's a very basic instruction. It's one of the things that you use without even thinking about it. Well, now you have to think about it. Let's have a look. Well, when you're doing that in WinDev and you do info, it stops the program, displays information, and waits till the user click or validate to continue. But in server code, info is not going to be executed. At least it's not going to be executed immediately. It will be executed only when the next page is sent to the client. And it will be executed on the client side with all the other display. So clearly it's totally different than the WinDev way of doing things, where info blocks the program execution. Here in WebDev, there is no blocking on the server side. It will block the client side, yes, but later. So clearly you try to do that, and oh, surprise, the line just after my info has been executed immediately. There's no waiting for the user to validate or anything like that. So now think of several programs working together and trying to do an info. Okay, you're trying to do visualize that. The server code does info, but the server code does not do any display. There's no display on the server. All the display is done on the client. So it has to store the string to display. Then it will prepare the next page based on the code that follows the info or is before the info. Everything in that code supposedly is to prepare the next display. So it will prepare the next page. And when that page is sent to the client, if it is sent to the client, because, well, depending on the code, the condition, and all this kind of thing, you could decide that suddenly you don't want to display that page to the client, you will end the session or whatever you want to do. So if and when the page is sent to the client, then the client browser would load the page, and in the onload code of the page there would be an info of that stored value. So as you can see, it's extremely different than just the simple info that you have in WinDev. And clearly it's not going to block the server. It's going to block the browser side, But if you have multiple info on the server, when will it block on the browser side? All after the other, before, after the onload code? You don't know exactly that. You're putting an info in a place where, well, perhaps it shouldn't be. And clearly it's not going to be done at the time where you code it. So you have a line that is there, but its effect will be really felt only later on and not on the same machine. Then there is this example of trying to manage a conditional display. That's something we all did in our Windows. You want to have something that is displayed only depending of some condition, fields, images, or whatever, and they're going to be displayed, and their content is going to be different depending of the user actions and all this kind of thing. So if in a page, in a WebDev page, you want to display fields depending of the user action, this is clearly browser code. Very easy. If the user check that checkbox, then this field become visible. Uncheck that checkbox, then these two fields will become invisible, and so on and so forth. There's nothing to it. But if you want to mix that with also condition that depends of the content of some files on the server, suddenly you have a mixed situation. It's a mix of client and server information that will decide what to do on the client side only. Imagine the user check a checkbox, uncheck another one, check a third one, and once this is done, you also have to check what values are in a, let's say, parameter file on the server, and all that just to display or not fields on the client side. Okay, we are talking about two computers that are separated by thousands of miles. So how do you do that? Well, let's see. The user clicks on checkboxes. Obviously, the information is going to be sent to the server through the submit button or immediately when the user clicks on the checkboxes. You have control to do on the server side too, so you're sending the information to the server. Then you are on the server side code. Okay, we're not in the page anymore, we're on the server. Here you're going to check the files depending on your code. You're going to look in the parameters, the value of the company, the user, the this, that, okay, and the fields value. The user requested this, that, check that option. Then the code is going to decide to, let's say, make 3 new fields visible, display a message in one of them, and send new values to a Java applet. Okay, there's a Java applet doing that. Is going to play a sound, a wave file that says you have chosen to do this or that, by example. So the server-side code is going to prepare everything by setting flags, global variable, by example, storing the values that have to be displayed on the browser side, etc., etc. Then the server is going to display the same page a second time. Okay, it's the same page, but it has to say, okay, there's a refresh, you have to do something. And in the page init code, the code on the browser side of the page is going to check, the same way it checked the first time, are these flags set or not. And if the global variable are set a certain way, then it's going to say, okay, if global variables say display 3 fields, then it will display the 3 fields. Then it will send the value that is in that other global variable to the Java applet that will play the sound, and so on and so forth. As you can see, just because you have things to do on the browser side and the server side, it's becoming quite a convoluted process. And if you don't think about it that way, you're going to try to do things on your server code and the field will never display. And you're going to try to play the sound on the server code and the sound will never play, and so on. So it's really a different way of looking at things. So what's the result of that? Obviously the web page is going to flash. In order just to make these three fields visible or invisible or send information to the Java applet, you have to go to the server and come back and redisplay the page, and you have this wonderful web effect of the page just flashing. So of course you can solve that using AJAX. AJAX stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. It's not a new technology. Every part of this technology already existed before. It's just a new way of using it. And well, it's for advanced user. And at this point, if you're still a WebDev beginner, you should not use AJAX at that point. So my advice is to build your website using the standard way. You have your flashing and all that, and understand very well how everything works. Work on understanding this web development philosophy. Once this is done, you will be able to really use AJAX. This is for later. Okay? So, is this complicated? Well, yes and no. It's basically two programs talking via the web. You can also look at that like two computers linked via two modems. If you never dealt with this kind of situation, well, yes, it's a little more complicated than what you are used to under Windows, but it's not that complex. You just have to consider that you have two software on two computers and they are talking together via a connection that is going through the web. Another very good example of the difference between developing a standard application and a WebDev website is what I call the stack of windows. In a standard software, you're going to have in some case the main window opening a secondary window. This secondary window is going to open a tertiary window or windows, okay, and so on. And you're going to end up with a stack of windows on top of each other. That's a very common situation. You're in the main UI. From there you open the company file. From there you open the contact file because you want to see what contacts are linked to the company. From there you open the address file because you want to see all the address for this contact. From there you and so on. That's absolutely normal, standard, no problem in there. So you have a whole stack of windows and nobody thinks twice about it. Of course you have two different cases. You have the case of model windows where, well, you have only one window that is active at a time, and you have to go back the way you came. You have to close the current window, then close the previous window, then close the previous one, and so on. In some cases you're going to code that when you close the last window it's going to close all the window before, but that's kind of rare. That's not the regular behavior. So that's the model case. It's easy to understand, one window working at a time. Then you have the non-model windows case. Well, I don't know if you ever tried to build an application where you have multiple non-model windows open at the same time. It's very freehand philosophy. You can do whatever you want. You have the company open, the contact open, the project open, and you can modify anything in any of them at any point. It's really great. Of course, when you have to code it, it's kind of less great because you have to consider all the cases. If somebody modified that project and my company is open, should I do this or that or the other? It's much more complicated, of course. And one thing that happens after that, once you've coded all that, is that the user is lost. It's absolutely typical. You have multiple things open at the same time, user forget that it's open, want to reopen the same thing, and all that ends up generally in a mess with information lost, duplicated, or whatever else. Perhaps you have seen in the main software out there in the last few years, that well, basically we are going back to a UI that is as simple as possible. So if it's not mobile, basically user will be lost, and you'll end up changing your UI because, well, it's just not usable. So either you'll stay with not modal window, but you will restrict what the user can do at any given time. Let's say you have 3 windows open at the same time maximum, not 30. Or you will manage a history, you will do many things to try to solve the problem, but you will change your UI to something that is much more restricted. Now think about the same problem for a website. It is perfectly possible, technically, to open multiple browser or pop-up. When you decide to display a new page, you can say that the target of this new page is not self, not the browser that is currently open, but another one. It's perfectly possible technically. But remember one thing, you don't have the modal case available. The other browser or the other tab in the browser or the pop-up window will be accessible at the same time than the main window you're coming from will be. Which means that basically the user will be able to do whatever he wants on any of the open windows. He will be able to close what we call, in this example, the main window, and leave the secondary open. So what will happen when you close the secondary window? Well, there will be nothing to come back to. Okay, so that's a very different case than what happened under our normal Windows program. And basically the user will go to another website because this one will just not work. This is not something that works correctly on the web. Remember also that users hate pop-ups. They hate this window that pops up everywhere in their windows, and that's the reason why there are so many software out there just blocking pop-ups. So if you start working like that, you're going to end up with half your user not being able to use your program anyway, because, well, the window you're trying to open will be blocked by this software. Also remember one thing. When did you see a website working like that? When did you see a website opening a window, then from there opening another window, and so on? Well, you didn't. That's the end of that question. You didn't, because it's just not manageable in a browser environment. As you can see, it is extremely different when you are working in WebDev than when you are working in WinDev. Your UI is and has to be totally different because of the constraint that now you now have in the browser system. Let's have a look at another example. How do you access the user machine? Well, in regular software development, it's kind of easy. You can access the MAC address, you can access the hard drive serial number, you can get hardware information, software information, system information, and a very good example of that is the protection course I gave you earlier in the WinDev course, where CL Protect, the class, is giving you all this kind of information in order to protect your software. So you want to do the same kind of thing, of course, when you are developing a website. You want to protect it, you want to check that people using it or people who are allowed to use it, and so you want to check on the user machine, which is one way of identifying easily people. That's what you think. Well, on the web, nope, you don't have any of this. Remember that the application that is running on the client machine is only part of your application, and this application is not running directly on the machine, it's running in the browser. The browser is a protected environment. It isolates your program from the user machine, and that's a very good thing, because if we didn't have this insulation between the two, we wouldn't be able to use the web because of all the viruses, website changing our system settings and all this kind of thing that would just kill the web by itself. So it's a very good thing. You have to like that. But it means that you cannot get to the machine information the way you're used to. So the browser is basically all you know. You don't have any other information. Of course, there is the exception of Java. In Java, you can access some user information. By example, you can get the username as logged on the machine, but you cannot get the MAC address. It's not possible in Java, because Java by itself also respects the insulation between the web and the system. But remember one thing, with Java it means that you have to load on the user machine a Java applet. And this Java applet has to be downloaded from your machine, from your server, and then this Java applet also has to load the Java virtual machine if it's not already loaded. So it means that it's going to be slow to load. It's also not accepted by many users. The settings, the security settings in the browser can very easily be set on no Java allowed, and if it's the case, you won't get that information. You also have the exception of using an ActiveX. It's possible on the web to use many type of software built as ActiveX. But it's only in Internet Explorer, which means that anybody using Firefox, by example, well, will not have this usable. It's also slow to load because the ActiveX has to be downloaded from your server once again, and we're not talking about 50K system, we're talking about 1 megabyte or 2 megabyte system most of the time. It's also not accepted by many users. In fact, it's way less accepted by many people because, well, an ActiveX can basically do anything on the user machine. Java can do a few things, but it's still very limited, very protected. ActiveX, it's a regular Windows program that runs inside a browser. So it can, in theory, do whatever it wants once you accepted it to run. It could format your hard drive, get any information that is available on the machine and send it, whatever. You really have to trust a website to allow ActiveX to run. So all these solutions, as you can see, are very limited, and if they can be used inside an intranet, by example, they are not adapted to the web development in general. And remember one thing, when a customer asks you for an intranet, even if it tells you that he will never open this intranet to the outside world, there's a very, very good chance that 1 or 2 years later he will tell you, okay, we have this intranet and now we want to have it available to our rep when they're outside. Yeah, via the web. No, not via VPN, all that. They just need to be able to access it via the web. It's easy, it's a website. Yeah, except that you coded everything for an intranet where you can control everything, and now you're talking about something that is totally different. So basically, on the web side of the problem, you have absolutely no control on the user environment. Get used to it, it's the way it is. Print is another very good example of the difference of philosophy when you're developing for the web. In a regular software, you can choose the printer. You now can get the margins since you followed my print without report course already. You can create the ad hoc report based on that printer margins and correct the size to fit in there, all these kind of wonderful things. On the web, again, nope. All this is absolutely not possible. Yes, there are ActiveX once again that can give you that. Of course, if it's an ActiveX, it's a Windows program, so all that is possible. But again, it would be extremely limited. So basically, the only solution that you have when you want to print on the web, you're going to prepare your report as HTML or PDF. That's the two different solutions. Then you're going to display it in the user browser, and you're going to let the user print using file print. So first it will say print in your website. You will prepare the report, and then you will do file print in order to print it. Okay, there are a few tricks that allow you to do a little better than that. When you create your report, you can have at the beginning of your report a print link that can open the print dialog, and then you let the user choose this and that and the other. But once the user has print, you are still on the report, so you also need a link to come back, or you need to open your report in a second browser or a second tab, and then you have the problem the user being on two different tabs and not seeing the report on the other tab and all this kind of thing. And you can also try to say, okay, when I prepare the report and when the user click on print, I open the print dialog, and as soon as the print dialog closes, I have some JavaScript code that will remove the report and go back to my main page. You can try to do that, except that it's not going to work. Well, you can do that quite easily in Firefox, but remember, all browsers are not compatible, which means that the code that will work in Firefox to do that will not work in Internet Explorer. And officially there is no solution in Internet Explorer to do that. I'm saying officially because I found a way to do it, and it seems that from the research I made on the web, I'm the only one who found it. And the main problem that you have with this solution is that you can open the print dialog, let the user do its thing. When the print dialog closes, okay, it's working in this version of Internet Explorer. Will it work in the next one? Will it work in the previous ones? That's really not sure. And will that work in other browsers? That's even less sure. So any type of solution that relies on some specific tricks for this version of that browser and so on, just to go around the way it's currently coded, is, in my opinion, a no-no. If you try to use this kind of thing, well, you end up with a system that is very limited in time. It will work now, it will not work tomorrow, and you will have to come back and find something else. And once the user is used to that functionality and you tell him, well, you can't have it anymore because it's not possible with the new browser, you're the one in trouble. So again, you see the difference, huge difference between what you are going to be able to do in WebDev development and WinDev. It's not the same thing. Let's now have a look at the problem of the browser behavior. In regular software development, Windows development, WinDev development, you prepare your UI and you test it on your machine. Basically, you know that it will work the same on any Windows machine. The list box will behave the same, the table will behave the same, and so on and so forth. Everything will be the same. So you don't have any really problem with Windows and the way your software is going to display in this or that environment, except for extreme cases, of course. Now on the web, you're going to prepare your UI the same way that you prepare any UI, of course. And once your beautiful UI is ready, you're going to test it on your machine with your browser or browsers if you have several installed on your machine. And then you have the problem. What about the others? Here is a little list of the browsers that are available out there. It's not all of them. It's just a few of them that I found when I was preparing this course. And well, did you know all of them? Internet Explorer, Firefox, Safari, Epiphany, Conqueror, Opera, Mozilla, Netscape, Camino, iCab, OmniWeb, Avant, Blazor, Clue, Escape, Ice Browser, Chameleon, Maxton, Netfront, WebTV Viewer. Well, if you knew all of them, you're really good. I really didn't. In fact, I didn't know most of them. Some of them are for Windows, some of them are for Linux, some of them are for the Mac, and well, some of them obviously are based on others. Like by example, you have Netscape and Firefox, both based on Mozilla, but not behaving the same way anyway. So I know that there are other ones out there, that's for sure. And I also know one thing, they are not compatible with each other. Not compatible at all. It's amazing. There are differences in the way they are interpreting HTML. HTML, the basic of the web, up to this day, they still have tags that works in some web browser and not in others. There are the difference in JavaScript. Just the way it's implemented. By example, in JavaScript you have an object structure for the browser. Well, in some browser you're talking about document dot something when you want to talk about your current page. In some other you're going to talk about page dot. And if you don't know that, well, your code is just not going to work in all browser. And differences in everything else. Basically, you can rely on absolutely nothing being standard in all of these browsers. So, are you ready to test on all of them? Look at the number they are, and remember, that's just the browser. We're not talking about the different versions of the browser that are out there. So, are you ready to test on all of them? If yes, you better have very, very big pockets, because it's going to take you a long, long time, and you're going to be reduced to the smallest common denominator. What is going to work on all of them? It's going obviously to be a much smaller subset of functionality than what you can have if you test for one or two. So that's another big problem that you have when you are working on the web, that you are not used to when you're coming from the Windows development environment. What should you do now that we've seen all the problem, well, at least a few of the main problems that you're going to find when you start working on the web? What should you do? Well, it's not that complicated. Think about it 1 second. First, think about your software with only one window or page open at a time. You can do that in any Windows program too. You can have one window replacing the previous one. If you code it that way, you're going to do a use of the new window, or have a main window that is hidden and opens one only one child window at a time. When you want to do something, close the previous one, open a new one, and you have only one window open at a time. It's the same behavior that you will have with tabs or with planes. So it's perfectly, it's a concept that is perfectly simple. You just have one step open at a time. Imagine that if you are used to do it in modal windows with a stack of windows, but all the main window are just not there. At any given point you only have one of them. So obviously one page is going to replace the previous one. And obviously also the new page can be the previous one slightly modified. That's the example of the code modifying the current page and based on information on the server and the browser side. So in that case you just redisplay the same one, only differently. The main thing is to keep it simple. You have to streamline your process. You cannot branch in all directions at the same time. You are in a much lighter environment, and therefore you have to keep your process as simple as possible. You are on the web. Remember that. You have all these constraints that you didn't have before. Now you have to deal with all these differences, and you have to really organize things differently. You have to have a web development philosophy. Regarding the test, well, my advice is to test on the two main browsers, Firefox and Internet Explorer, and leave it at that. Together, if the last statistic I've read are true, there are 93% of all users out there between Firefox and Internet Explorer. 93%, well, it's kind of good in the web environment. So you can tell your user that your website has been tested for Firefox and Internet Explorer, and that if they are using anything else, well, it's not supported, it's up to them. Now, one good thing is to tell them that. It's very easy to test what the user browser is, so if they're using something that you didn't test on, when they arrive, you should tell them you are using a browser and that is not on the list of the approved browser for this website. It's possible that some things will not work. But we'll talk about that later in the good development practice for the web course. Remember also one thing. Any process that you implemented on a Windows software is probably also implementable on the web. But is it a good idea? Is it the type of process that you should implement? And remember one thing, the links between processes will be different. You're not able to have 5 windows open at the same time and switch from one to the other. You can have the process in each window implemented, but the links between all of them will be different. That's absolutely sure. Remember also one thing, there's a very simple trick when you wonder, is that a good idea? Should I do this way or that way? When you don't know if it's a good idea, look around. If nobody does it, there's a very good chance that it's not such a good idea for the web. Even if you don't know why, if you have an idea and you see that absolutely nobody is doing that, either you had the idea of the century, or you're just starting a long run in a dead-end street. That's one of the two. Generally, it's the second thing. So, if you're not sure if it's a good idea, also ask yourself, is it simple? If it's not simple, it's probably not a good idea for the web. Now, is it easy to implement? Because something that is going to be simple for the user can be extremely complex to implement. So do you want to implement something extremely complex on the web? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Remember, simple is good. And finally, is it slow? If the process that you want to implement is something that is going to take minutes, on the web, most of the time it's not going to work. They will not wait that long. So remember, a simple working website, simple and working is much better than a very complex not working one. If you create a website that does everything in the contrary, but you can't make it work, nobody will use it. If you have a very simple website that does only one or two or three simple things, but it's working well, people will have a tendency to use it. And one very good example of that you have to remember, and I try to remember all the time when I'm coding for the web, is the Google website. This thing is a huge success, nobody can contest that. Well, when you look at the UI, it's a blank page with one field to enter your search query and a total of perhaps 10 links, small, in blue, nothing big, one logo, and that's it. And this thing is probably the most viewed website in the world. There's a very good reason for that. It's extremely simple for the user. What's going on behind the scene on the server side is extremely complex, but it's not the UI. The UI is extremely simple, and all their UIs are like that. So when you don't know if something is a good idea, try to compare two things like that, and it will probably give you the answer.